The Iran war is causing a global energy crisis. Can China withstand it? China has long braced for a Gulf oil supply shock, but the Iran war's disruption of a key global shipping route is now putting its resilience to the test. Energy shipments from the Middle East have been at a standstill following Iran's threats to attack vessels that pass through a critical trade waterway as retaliation against U.S.-Israeli strikes. The blockade has led to a global oil shortage, which has rocked Gulf-reliant Asian countries hard, with the Philippines mandating 4-day work weeks to save fuel, and Indonesia seeking ways to avoid burning through reserves that will last just weeks. China, the world's largest buyer of oil, is also feeling the strain. But the country sits in a better position than its neighbors after years of statecraft that have prepared it for a global energy crisis. A test of China's energy network. The world economy has been thrown into turbulence since the U.S. and Israel launched strikes against Iran in late February. Since then, oil prices have at points soared to close to $120, 90 pounds a barrel, pushed up by strikes on shipping and energy infrastructure and the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the world's busiest oil shipping channel. About a fifth of the world's oil passes through the strait, around 20 million barrels each day, according to estimates from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA. The shortage has left countries scrambling for alternative crude suppliers outside of the Gulf, while others are tapping into their own oil reserves. As the world's second-largest consumer of oil after the U.S., China uses an estimated 15 to 16 million barrels of oil daily, various market analysts told the BBC. The oil is mainly used for China's massive transportation network of cars, trucks, and jets, and much of it comes from abroad. Gulf countries are a major source of the oil China ships in, with barrels from Saudi Arabia and Iran accounting for more than 10% of its imports each, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA. Most of the country's imported crude oil, which comes from Iran and the Middle East through the South China Sea, is used as fuel to support factories and transportation, mainly in the southern half of China. The country's north, however, is mainly powered by oil produced domestically in major oil fields, along with pipeline imports from Russia, and these are not disrupted by the war in the Middle East. While many Asian countries have relied heavily on oil from Gulf nations, Russian oil accounts for nearly a fifth of China's energy imports. That makes Moscow by far Beijing's biggest oil supplier, despite sanctions from the U.S. and Europe. Coal is also the dominant source of power for most of China's electricity and is available in abundance locally. China is the world's largest coal producer, accounting for more than half of global production. Oil and gas, meanwhile, account for just over a quarter of China's total energy mix, according to estimates published in state media, making the country less dependent on the resource than Europe and the U.S. Prepared for rainy days. Beijing has over the years taken advantage of lower crude prices and the abundance of supply from Gulf states to build one of the world's biggest oil reserves, says Ole Hansen, Saxo Bank's head of commodity strategy. In January and February of this year alone, Beijing bought 16% more crude compared to the same time period a year earlier, according to its Customs Administration. Iran, whose oil is sanctioned by the U.S., has been a key supplier of cheap crude for China, with reports suggesting that Beijing buys more than 80% of Iran's oil exports. Vessel tracking data since the Iran war started indicates that some of this oil is still arriving in China, though analysts disagree on the exact size of China's oil stockpile. According to trade analytics group CLER, more than 46 million barrels of Iranian crude oil, several days' worth of energy, currently sit in tankers along the South China Sea. Hansen says that estimates show China has built up reserves of around 900 million barrels, just under 3 months' worth of imports. Figures from Columbia University, cited by Chinese state media, said China had petrol reserves of some 1.4 billion barrels. It is also unclear how much daily imported energy China is using right away and how much is being funneled into its oil reserves, says Hansen. The sheer volume, he adds, still serves as a substantial buffer for times of disruption. Despite its reserves, Beijing has shown signs of caution to manage its supplies in the near future. Authorities in China reportedly ordered its oil refineries to stop exporting fuel for the time being, in an attempt to keep domestic prices under control. China's government did not respond to BBC queries on the matter. China has become a world leader in green energy, rapidly rolling out wind and solar farms across the country. Wind, nuclear, solar, and hydropower generated more than a third of China's electricity in 2025, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. But the country has since expanded its renewables grid significantly, with estimates saying more than half the installed capacity is now from clean sources. As a result of its renewable push, crude oil only made up around a fifth of China's total energy consumption in 2024. And this demand for oil is unlikely to rise again in the future, according to the International Energy Agency, IEA. Energy economics researcher Roger Fouquet said China's ambitious transition to renewables is not merely an environmental move, but has also helped to protect its economy from global risks like those we're seeing with the Iran conflict. To some extent, China is fortunate that 25 years ago it began its investment in renewable energy and it is now reaping the benefits, he said. Electric vehicles, EVs, which account for at least a third of new cars sold in China, have also helped the country's economy become less reliant on oil, said Rock Sher from the University of Technology, Sydney. It means an EV owner in Beijing simply doesn't feel the pain at the pump when the Middle East flares up, he said. Their mobility costs are decoupled from international oil markets. The world runs on invisible currents, oil flowing through narrow seas, gas crossing continents, energy binding economies together. When war erupts in a place like Iran, those currents don't just slow, they shudder, fracture, and sometimes stop entirely. What we are witnessing now is not just a regional conflict, but a stress test of the global energy system. And at the center of that test stands China. The war has ignited one of the most severe energy shocks in modern history. The closure and disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of global oil and LNG passes, has sent prices soaring above $100 per barrel and rattled markets worldwide. Tankers hesitate, insurers panic, and nations scramble to secure supplies. Energy, once taken for granted, has become a weapon. For China, this is more than a distant crisis. It is a direct challenge to the foundations of its economic power. China is the world's largest energy consumer, a vast industrial machine that depends heavily on imported fuel. It imports roughly 70% of its oil and gas, much of it from the Middle East. Nearly half of its oil flows through the vulnerable Strait of Hormuz. And Iran itself has been a crucial supplier, not just for volume, but for price, discounted crude.